Hey, good evening, everyone. We're back. This week, we're going to give you our predictions for our top five PPR fantasy football wide receivers in 2022. As usual, I have Justin with me again. How you doing, bro?
Good man, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm ready to talk some fantasy football, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one here. Wide receivers. A lot.
Definitely. All right, cool. I think this is one of the tougher positions to pick to narrow a top five down. So,
Yeah,
all
you're
right, cool.
surprising people today.
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's get into it here. As usual, we'll take a look at the top five wideouts from last year. Number one, we had Cooper Cup, obviously Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP. We had number two was Devonte Adams, who was traded to Las Vegas in the spring. Number three was our favorite wide receiver, Debo Samuel, who is the definition of a real life flex position player last year. Then we had number four, we had second year man Justin Jefferson. And rounding out the top five from last year was first year man Jamar Chase for Cincinnati. So that was your top five from last year. We'll go ahead and give our top five now. This year, I'm going to go first this week, bro. We'll switch it up a little bit, give my predictions, and then we'll get yours. And before we get started, everybody go ahead and hit that like button and share this video with your friends. All right, let's go ahead. All right, so here are my top five. The reason I want to go first is because I actually have the same top five from last year as my top five this year. I just have them finishing in a different order this year. So I have Jamar Chase going from number five to number one. I think he and Joe Burrow are just going to take it to another level this year. Obviously, Burrow is going to be one more year removed from his ACL injury. They're obviously going to be pretty confident coming off their Super Bowl trip as well. And, again, he was number five as a rookie. And typically, guys like him are poised to make a big second year leap. So that's why I have him at number one. I have last year's number one receiver, Cooper Cup, at number two. I think he's going to have another phenomenal year with Matthew Stafford, another year, another offseason to get even more cohesion. Matthew Stafford did a great job of finding him, throwing him the ball when he needed him last year. I imagine they pick up right where they left off. So really not much more to say about Cooper Cup other than he's going to catch a ton of passes, ton of yards, touchdowns. That's why he's going to be number one or number two. I have Justin Jefferson at number three. Since this guy's come into the NFL, he's really been nothing short of unguardable. So Mike Thomas, watch out because the league really just can't guard JJ. Uh, I think with Kirk Cousins, obviously leaning on him a lot, I think he continues to be Kirk Cousins' go-to guy in Minnesota. He's going to have another big year this year. And, fun fact, I'm sure everybody's pretty aware, since 2020, nobody has more receiving yards than Justin Jefferson does in his first two seasons. And I think if he can get the touchdowns to go along with the receiving yards, then he can obviously finish higher on this list. Last year, he only had 7 touchdowns. In his rookie year, he had 10 touchdowns. So he did have a decline in touchdowns. So if he can pick that back up, I think that he has a good shot to finish, higher on this list possibly. Number 4, I have Debo Samuel. I don't think that he has much of a drop-off, even though he doesn't want to come out of the backfield. I think once his contract is taken care of, you're going to see a much happier guy playing football. You're not going to hear any complaints out of him. He's already liked a tweet that said that he felt like he and Brandon Ayuk were the best returning wide receiver duo in the NFL. And, if Brandon Ayuk finishes the season the way or plays this season the way he finished last season and Debo maintains his production, you really can't argue with them. That's a pretty dangerous combo, and they proved it to finish the season. But again, back to Debo. Obviously, he doesn't want to play in the backfield, so that's going to take away from some of those catches. I'm not catches, but touches as a halfback. But I do believe Kyle Shanahan's just going to find ways to get him on bubble screens, wide receiver screens, reverses, and just get him the ball in the open field. And I think that's what Debo really wants. He wants to get the ball in those situations, but I don't think he wants to have to go through the line and run between the tackles, which is what they were having him do at times last year. So I think if they can do that, he's poised to have another big season. I don't see his production dropping off much with first-year starter and Trey Lance taking over. And then finally, I have Devonte Adams at number 5. I think he could be higher on this list. I also think he could miss the list altogether. Just depends on how Las Vegas season goes. Really, I had to pick somebody for number 5, and I landed on Devonte. So I think he's going to have a really good year, though, with Derek Carr. Obviously, they have some chemistry from playing together in college. Derek Carr is not Aaron Rodgers, of course, but that chemistry goes a long way. Derek Carr is a very talented quarterback. He's no slouch, that's for sure. So I think Devonte coming in and providing them another red zone weapon opposite of Waller is really going to pay off big dividends for them. And I think Devonte could really rack up a lot of touchdowns in Las Vegas this year. So obviously, we were talking about before we started, kind of it's hard to predict, a lot of these positions. I think wide receiver is one of the tougher ones. So really, I went back and forth on a couple, but these are my top 5. And I would love to hear what your feedback is.
I like them. It's really hard. Like we said, before we started with wide receivers. I mean, it's really hard to argue with this type of top 5, especially with the talent there. I have a couple of these receivers on my top 5. I'm going to surprise a few people who I don't have in my top 5. But I'm not gonna spill the beans just yet on that. I like Jamar Chase, definitely. Cooper Kupp, Jefferson. Jefferson, I want to touch base on a little bit because it's going to be interesting, actually. With Jefferson now has Cooper Kupp's OC from last year as his head coach. So Cooper Kupp was the only Jefferson was the only wide receiver to even come close to Kupp's production last year in fantasy, and now he's got his OC as head coach. There was a quote. There was a quote from an NFL Network reporter quoting Jefferson saying they're not a run-first offense anymore. So I really like Jay Jefferson in this list. Jamar Chase with Burrow at quarterback. I mean, honestly, whoever the number 1 receiver there is, I would say is going to be a good fantasy receiver. It helps a lot that Jamar Chase is really talented on top of that. I believe he's due for a bit of touchdown regression this year, big play regression. So I wouldn't put him at number 1, but top 5, definitely see him in there again this year. He's got one of the better quarterbacks in the league, not just one of the better up-and-coming young quarterbacks, just one of the better quarterbacks overall. And I believe that offense is going to take another step forward this year. So I love Jamar Chase. Probably a little bit of, like I said, touchdown regression and big play regression because he did get a lot of deep balls, a lot of big plays last year. So we'll see. I hope he has another big year. As far as, AFC team goes, I'd say the Bengals are one of my favorite teams. So I hope he does well. Cooper Kupp there in the number 2 position. It's hard to argue with having Kupp in your top 5 because of the season that he put together last year, being I believe his 6th season in the league, 7th season in the league. Don't quote me on that, but I know he's been in the league a little while. He finished number 1, highest finish. It was his 2nd top 10 PPR finish. I think the presence of Allen Robinson this year is going to have a bigger impact on his fantasy value than most people would actually think. I know some people were, going to go, wow, that's a big assumption there. But Allen Robinson alone has had 3 top 10 PPR finishes in fantasy in his career. He has been in the league longer than Kupp, but he is actually younger than Kupp. I mentioned this to you the other day as one of my bold predictions, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I do believe that Robinson is going to eat in a little bit more than people would think. He's going to be playing with the best quarterback of his career. He put up those top 10 PPR finishes with Blake Bortles. Let me say that again, Blake Bortles, and 2 with Mitchell Trubisky. So I do like Robinson. I'm not saying Kupp doesn't have the ability to be top 5, but he commanded a 33% target share last year. I think Allen Robinson is going to eat into that a little bit. And then again, he lost his OC. Now, I know Sean McVay is a mastermind, but they're going to be putting in a new OC. So we'll see how that goes. I really believe he takes just a little bit of step back as well, but I love him right where you have him. He could easily be number 1 on this list. Debo. It pains me to really talk much about Debo because I think he's due for some regression in fantasy as well because he's not going to get a lot of rushing yards. I believe that Ayuk, to this point, from reports out of training camp, what I'm seeing on Twitter and stuff like that, has really built that chemistry with Trey Lance. I'm not saying he's going to have a better season than Debo by any means, but I do believe it makes a difference, especially early in the season when you've got a young quarterback who hasn't started many NFL games. The chemistry is important. The timing is important. So I feel like early in the season, he may actually look to Ayuk a little bit more because their timing might be a little bit better. Their chemistry might be a little bit better. Debo's not holding out, but he's got his contract. He's looking for a new contract. He did request a trade, but like you mentioned earlier, Simpson has kind of went out and said, hey, we're going to be the best returning wide receiver tandem, and I think that's highly possible. So with that said, the 49ers run the ball so much. If Ayuk does eat into Debo's targets at all, especially early in the season, it's hard for me to see him, finishing in the top 5. But if that's not the case, if he just hits the ground running like he did last year, he was on pace. If they didn't hand off the ball to Debo last year in the second half of the season as much as they did, he still would have finished top 5 in fantasy as a receiver. So to me, this is really just, are they going to have the chemistry early on in the season, and how long is it going to take for him and potentially Trey Lance? I'm assuming he's going to be the starter. How long is it going to take for them to build chemistry and for them to be on the same page? And then Devonte, I like Devonte right where you have him because I wouldn't put him any higher than number 5 simply based on the fact that they have a lot of other talent. I think Renfrow is going to benefit a little bit more given the new coach that they have and the fact that now Devonte Adams is going to command a lot more double teams than Renfrow or Waller will. I don't see any regression. I think Devonte Adams is going to have a big season still. I also want to see if Carr and Adams force the issue at all. They do go way back. They're best friends, obviously. So I want to see if they force the issue, because if they force the issue early in the season and just try and force feed him the ball, it could turn into sloppy plays, turnovers, so on and so forth. It could turn into big plays. But I like this list. I really like this list that you have right here. Mine, I have a couple of the same, a couple of different. But I really like the list you have right there. They could easily all be in the top 5. If the situations were a little bit different for some of these guys, I'd have them in my top 5. So, that's how I feel about that. I would say Devonte Adams is probably the one on this list that as much as, as good as he is, not as much as I think he is good. As good as he is, I know it's difficult not to put him in the top 5, but I just feel like Waller, he's going to have a bounce back season. McDaniels loves historically to use his slot receiver, going back to his days in New England. And Renfrow, man, he finished number 11 last year in PPR. So I have reason to believe he could creep right back on up in there and still have another stellar season.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with what you're saying. I definitely get, the Devonte Adams argument with trying to force the issue. Obviously, with McDaniels, he does historically like use the slot receiver. So I you know what? Like I said, I was going through a few different guys. I just landed on Devonte. Renfrow was actually in that carousel as I was going around. I was thinking to myself, he might be close to this year's Cooper Kupp. So I went back and forth. So I can't really argue, with what you said on that. I just feel like, again, I don't think they're going to try and force the issue. I maybe, but I doubt it. I think Derek Carr's smarter than that. And I think Josh McDaniels won't let him do that. So, but we'll see. Obviously, they have to play the games, and we'll find out. I don't think they're going to force the issue, but I do think they may get off to a slower start. But again, once they get that familiarity back and that cohesion back, I think that they finish the season strong, putting up a lot of fantasy points. At least I don't know. I haven't really looked at the Raiders' schedule as far as trying to analyze it for wins and losses, but I do think that Devontae's going to have a big fantasy year. So, and then with Debo, I definitely understand that there's a big possibility they could have regression by not playing that quote unquote wide back position, right? But I think that's where Kyle Shanahan's coaching comes in, and he's going to set him up with those wide receiver screens, reverses, different things like that. And then the other thing is this: Debo's really good at run after catch, obviously, and I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity to get run after catch yards and big plays that way with Trey Lance at quarterback as opposed to Jimmy Garoppolo. So. But again, I couldn't argue. It's very possible he could miss the list altogether with depending on what happens with the other teams. So, all right, cool. Everyone else, we'd love to hear your feedback on my top 5 in the comments, and then we'll go ahead and jump over to your top 5, bro. Here we go.
Yeah, I can't wait to get some flack on this because I know two of the guys I have here people are gonna go, "What the hell?" So J-Jeff, yeah, I got J-Jeff number 1. Like I mentioned earlier, recently he was quoted saying, we're not a run first offense anymore, and I have reason to believe it. Last year tells us anything. Kevin O'Connell is gonna throw the ball, or he's gonna have his offense throw the ball. I believe Jefferson is in line for a season like Kupp had last year. I have him as my number 1. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's electric. The dude's electric. I like watching him play. I'm not a Vikings fan, but I like watching Jefferson play. If I had an opportunity to draft him in my fantasy league, I absolutely would, because he's going to have a great season. Kirk Cousins isn't the greatest quarterback, but I will say this: he's consistent. He stays healthy, stays on the field. He doesn't miss games. He's got chemistry with his receivers. Him and Thielen a few years ago were balling out. Also Diggs, they had Diggs, and they trade Diggs. They get Jefferson. Jefferson balls out as a rookie, and Cousins continues to play well. So I believe now that the Vikings have an offensive-minded head coach to go with Kirk Cousins, to pair with Kirk Cousins, and these wide receivers. And I mean, God, they got Dalvin Cook. Look at all the weapons they got. Irv Smith, they're expecting to have a big season, the tight end. So I think that J-Jeff's going to have a monster season. Maybe not 1,900 yards and all the production that Kupp had, but he's going to get really close. And I have him as my number 1. Now, number 2, I've got Diggs as my number 2. This is one of the picks we have differently. I believe Diggs is gonna, I wouldn't say bounce back because he didn't have a terrible year last year. But I think Buffalo's gonna be a bit more efficient in their ground game. Diggs actually, his catch rate dropped a little bit last year, about 10% to the year previous. I believe that's going to go back up. He's going to catch more passes. Target share and everything was right around the same. He just dropped a few more passes last year. The amount of balls he caught was a little bit lower last year. So I think that goes back up, and that puts him right there at number 2. He's even going to score more touchdowns because last year he had 10 touchdowns. I believe he's going to put up about 15 touchdowns this year with Josh Allen. The Bills have something to prove. They don't have Cole Beasley anymore in their offense. They have Gabriel Davis, who's up and coming, so he might eat into some targets. But I believe the Bills' offense can be a lot more efficient this year. Diggs is going to get his catch rate back up. He's not going to drop, as many passes as he did last year, and I believe he's going to score more touchdowns. Now, as far as Chase, hey, I love Burrow. Smoking Joe Burrow is my guy. I wish. I wouldn't say I wish because I'm gonna be a Trey Lance fan for a long time, hopefully. But Burrow, man, the dude's legit. I'm gonna enjoy watching him play for a long time, and I hope that he's playing with Jamar Chase for a long time because the connection with these guys is stellar. Jamar Chase, I have him as my number 3 because I do believe he's going to score a lot of touchdowns. He might regress a little bit as far as the amount of touchdowns. He might regress as far as the amount of big plays, but I think he's going to catch more passes this year. I think he's going to be a lot more involved. He's going to take a big step forward going into his second season. And he's, as PPR, obviously, the more balls you catch, the more points you get. So I think he's going to catch a lot more passes this year and put up even more yards than he did last year. So according to a couple of reports, he actually had over 8 receptions in more games than all fantasy receivers. So I think that was pretty stellar, actually, for a rookie. 13 touchdowns last year. If he regresses from that even to 10, he's still going to have a really good season. The Bengals offense has a lot of firepower, and I didn't do a lot of research on Chase. The eye test for me is what it is. I believe that he's just going to have a big season as long as he stays healthy. Him and Burrow have that connection. He's their primary weapon, and as long as he's healthy and Burrow's the quarterback, he's going to remain their primary weapon. He's going to get all the targets, or as many as possible. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns, and he's going to get a lot of big plays. Now, CD, here's another one I think people are going to look at me and go, what? CD? But Gallup, let's start there. Actually, let me take a step back. No Amari Cooper. He's off to Cleveland. Gallup, he's injured. He probably will be injured for the first few weeks of the season, in fact. The Cowboys are going to throw the ball. So they're going to have to throw it to someone, and, of course, that someone's going to be CeeDee Lamb. I believe his target share is going to go up dramatically this year without the presence of Cooper, without Gallup early in the year. They have a third-round rookie, I believe, slated as their starter right now in Gallup's position if he's not healthy to start the year. I think CeeDee Lamb's going to have a breakout season. I toggled with putting him as in my top 3, but I believe he's going to have a really, really good year. I think he's going to break 1,200 yards. He hasn't broken 1,000 since he's been in the league, but I believe he's going to do that this year. I'm sorry, he hasn't broken 1,200 since he's been in the league. He got 1,100 last year, but I believe he's going to get over 1,200 yards this year. He's going to get some positive progression on touchdowns. He only scored 6 touchdowns last year. I think that's going to go up as a result of no Cooper, no Gallup early in the year. I put him for double-digit touchdowns. So, again, PPR, a lot of catches, a lot of touchdowns equals points. I got CeeDee Lamb in my top 5, and I feel the strongest about Lamb of any of those receivers in the positions I have them right now. That's how strongly I feel about CeeDee. Now, Deonte. So here's another one where people are going to turn their heads and be like, Deonte? He doesn't even have Big Ben anymore. Well, he finished in the top 10 PPR a season ago. He commands the largest target share on the roster. That's not going to change. And let's just be honest, Big Ben last year, I think a rookie quarterback even, Trubisky even at this point, is better than Big Ben was last year. Time will tell, but because the fact that they're going to have a young quarterback in there, whether it be Trubisky or the rookie that they drafted, I think Johnson's going to continue to command a very high target share. He's really like the only experienced receiver they got. Claypool, they've had a couple years, but he hasn't had a monster season. He hasn't proven to be a consistent or reliable weapon in their offense. Freiermuth, he's coming into his second year as a tight end. But again, same thing there. You know, he's going to have to develop some chemistry with the new quarterback. And he's got to prove this year that he can remain as consistent as he was last year in the end of the season. So I think Johnson, based on volume alone, just like with Najee, when we did our top 5, like when they go to throw the ball, they're going to throw it to Johnson, probably more often than not. He's going to get a lot of targets. He's going to score touchdowns, and that's why I have him as my number 5 in a Steelers offense that's going to look to him as their consistent threat as a wide receiver. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on those. Some of your thoughts on the ones that I had different than you, especially because I know these are going to turn heads, but I feel really confident in these picks. Especially some of the other receivers that we have listed, like could have listed here. Tyree Kill, quarterback change, just like Deonte, but he's playing with the quarterback again that over the years has been up and down. They have some talent there, and their coach, he likes to run the ball, so we'll see. I feel confident. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I obviously I like your top three. Can't argue with Diggs. I consider putting Diggs in my top five. I consider putting CeeDee Lamb in my top five. So really, I turned my head a little bit looking with CeeDee Lamb. Diggs, not so much. Diggs obviously could easily finish in the top five. I believe he was top one, or he was like number one or number two just a couple of years ago. So definitely think that he could, have another good breakout season. Like you said, not necessarily a bounce back season because he didn't have a bad season last year. I think he just can have a better season than he did last year, this year. Because you're right, Buffalo does have something to prove. And at some point, they're either going to prove it or they're going to go, into obscurity. So I think they're probably going to prove it before they go into obscurity. So I can't argue with Diggs, of course. The one that really made me turn my head, and I know that he finished in the top 10 last year, but the one that made me turn my head was Deonte Johnson. Him finishing in the top five this year. Well, obviously, I don't think that anything's impossible. It's just hard for me with that uncertainty that they have at quarterback. Because here's the thing: the one thing I can say, and you're right, Big Ben was definitely not the Big Ben we're used to last year, right? But every single week they knew who their starter was going to be, right? I think that, depending on, and I'm not saying that Mike Tomlin's, a knee-jerk reaction type of guy, but depending on who he starts and how they feel about him going throughout the season, if they decide to switch quarterbacks, he might get a lot of volume, but they may have to switch up, they have to rebuild that chemistry and things. So not impossible, but I think that out of all of them, I think that's the one that's the least likely. But again, I could be wrong. As far as CeeDee Lamb goes, I will definitely agree with you. He's going to see an increased target share. No Amari Cooper. Gallup is hurt. He's really the guy. He's the go-to guy. I mean, like you said, they got a third-round draft pick starting opposite of him. So he basically is the wide receiver room right now until Gallup gets back. Of course, they have Dalton Schultz. They have their running game. But if they like to throw the ball. McCarthy's known for throwing the ball all over the place when he had Aaron Rodgers. They led the league in passing last year, I think, as well, or were in the top two or three. So I could definitely see CeeDee Lamb finishing there. I gave you my top five. So for now, I'm going to predict that he doesn't finish there, but I would not be surprised one bit if he does. Again, Stefan Dick's not much to say other than he's got a great quarterback throwing him the ball. He's going to get a ton of targets, get a ton of catches, and if he can make up for some touchdowns, grab some extra touchdowns, obviously he can finish there. I wouldn't be surprised. Really, I can't argue with the top five. The one that I would say I don't think is likely is Deonte Johnson, but again, with his workload, it's very possible. And at the same time, you mentioned a few other guys. Tyree Kill could have been on this list. I think wide receiver is the hardest group for me that we've done so far to pick a top five and be like, okay, that's my top five, and I'm going to stick with these five. I probably had about 6 or 7 top fives before I sent it over to you and was like, all right, this is who I'm going with. So, again, I can't argue with them. I just feel like out of all of them, I would say Deonte Johnson is the one that I'm in wait-and-see mode about.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too. I definitely am too, but I'm confident. I think he's going to be primed for a big year. I think he's going to be looked to early and often. I wouldn't move him up in my list, though. Tell you that much.
Yeah, I don't blame you for that. So, all right, everyone. Well, that's our top five. We would definitely love to see your top five in our comments, or just leave a comment. Tell us where we're wrong, where we're right. And as always, be on the lookout for more content next week.